Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of a very interesting little set of earbuds, the wireless earbuds, and that's these little guys right here. These are the here, as in I am here, number one earbuds. These have a very interesting premise that makes them different than a lot of the other wireless buds out there on the market, like, for instance, your Apple EarPods or otherwise. Their big shtick is that in addition to the part that goes into your ears, like these guys, you will just push these into your ears and then you keep them there for as long as you'd like, because they will allow sound to pass through, not like directly. There is no direct connection between your ear canal and the outside world, but via microphones and then speakers coming into there. It's a really neat idea, and you can blend then the outside world coupled with the inside world, basically with whatever music or videos or whatever you're playing through these, such that you will be able to listen to the world while at the same time listening to your music. Kind of a weird thing, but you know what? I figured I'd give it a try, and I want to thank my buddy Jim for recommending I check these little guys out. I always appreciate when people flag interesting things. And yeah, so this is a neat little thing. First off, though, let's do a little size comparison. This right here, just to give you a sense of things, is a ruler looking at inches and meters here. Right here, we've got a standard U.S. quarter and a U.S. penny right here, although slightly gnawed upon. This wouldn't be my channel if I didn't give a size comparison with the Spyderco Delica pocket knife here. And, of course, one thing a lot of people are going to be curious about are the Apple EarPods. And so, right here, these are the EarPods. And this is the case for the Here One, and so you can see here, major difference in size between the cases. But anyways, there you go. So that's a size comparison. Now let's go into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of your little Here One earbuds. Okay, so on the good side, first and foremost, I like the idea that these guys are doing. Basically, their goal is to create something that not only allows you to hear whatever you're listening to, but allows you to change the way that you hear in the world around you. That's kind of their shtick here, is that they're using fancy digital signal processing here in order to remove annoyances. This comes in a couple of ways. I mean, for starters, the earbuds themselves are sound isolating. And so if you turn off the outside world gets a whole bunch quieter. But you can be more intelligent about it. You can use what are called filters. You hook your, you basically, you pair these guys with your phone, and unfortunately I can't show you the app because I'm filming on the phone right now. But nonetheless, you hook it up to the app, and then you can select different filters, ranging from airplane to city to different subway systems, that kind of thing. And those will allow you to pass sound through from the outside world, but to filter that sound and remove, for instance, the annoying parts of being on an airplane, those predictable sounds, or the parts of being on a subway, or the parts, and they've even got to the extent where they've tuned it for different subways. That's a neat idea. And I love the customizability of it there. And the idea of filtering the outside world rather than blocking it out is great. Because imagine you're sitting on an airplane and you're talking to somebody in the next seat. You want to be able to hear them very clearly, but you don't need to hear the plane. And so, great freaking idea. And I love that they've gone to the trouble of offering all of these various different filters, and by and large, they seem to work pretty well, given I haven't had a chance to wear these on the NYC subway, but by and large, the filters are filtering out the ugly stuff. So that's great. And I like the overall idea of it very much. Next thing, on a more practical side, these are actually not as large in the ear as you'd think. They fit nicely within the overall oval of my ear, and they hang out nicely. You put this little guy in there, and then these just store, and they're pretty secure. They're not coming out. I never had issues with them falling out, etc. Just well done there, and they're actually reasonably comfortable. I mean, is it as good as having nothing in your ear? No. But at the same time, look, they work. They're fine. For the hour and a half you're going to have them in, maybe 2 hours, you're going to be A-okay with them. At least I sure was. And they include different tips and different sizes if the stock ones don't happen to fit your ears. Next thing, these guys have what's called a bypass mode on there, where basically if you are wearing them and you tap a little area on it, it will actually allow you to completely bypass the sound filtering to turn off your music and everything. This puts you in full touch with the outside world, basically. You hear everything that's going on outside. That's a nice thing in and of itself, because you can immediately turn off, if you reach up and tap that, you can talk to somebody no problem. Or if you're about to cross a busy street, you put it on bypass mode, so you hear cars coming more readily, etc. That's a nice idea. But the thing is, when you are in bypass mode, when all of the sound is getting through, these actually do a pretty good job. It sounds a lot like the outside world. And you get things like sound locating cues. With some headphones, it can be a little tricky to maintain, but these seem to maintain basic sound location, not like up-down so much, but, and of course they couldn't do that, but like side to side, you can very much still hear what's going on. So there you go. That's a nice thing. There's also relatively little audio lag, I've noticed. It's not the case that you hear the outside world on a tape delay, which I appreciate very much when you're in the bypass there. In terms of listening to music or movies or whatever, the sound quality on these guys is fine. Honestly, I would even say it's good. It's slightly better than the AirPods that Apple is using. It's a little bit better than actually, I would say it is better than the Beats X, and it's way better than like your stock iPhone earbuds, the crap they give you on a plane. So sound quality here is A-okay. I got no real complaints with it. I had no problem listening to music on these little guys. They're good. So there you go. And speaking of which, I like these for listening to music or watching YouTube videos or listening to podcasts or books on tape, especially with the ability to turn down the outside world a little bit, because you're able to listen to a book or something like that, but you still have a pretty good sense of what's going on around you, auditorily speaking. You can still hear the bus coming, even though, everything's just a little bit quieter. So that is a nice experience, and it makes listening to music at a bus stop a whole lot nicer than it otherwise would be. Then finally, on the good side, they offer actually customized filtering for each person. Basically what they do is they play you a series of tones with some white noise. Well, it's not actually white noise, I'm sorry. It's noise that's frequency weighted to match the tone in the other ear. Long freaking story there. But anyways, they play you tones, and then you adjust the little slider until you can hear the tone or not. As somebody with some considerable experience with audiology, this is a really cool little thing here. I don't necessarily think the testing method is super robust. This is not a substitute for actually getting a hearing screening. Everyone should do that every so often. And I gotta say that looking at my most recent audiogram versus their test results, they're missing the boat. They haven't quite gotten that nailed down there. But it is better than nothing. And the end result of this is that you can basically adjust each earbud to match the issues with your own hearing. If you're losing sound at high frequency, these get rid of that, or it adds a little bit more sound, etc. So I like that approach very much, and I love the idea. The idea of a personalized filter, the idea of absolutely personalized, hearing from headphones is something whose time has come. So great thing there. So for me, that's what's good about these little guys. They give you the custom filtering. They allow you to listen to music very nicely without losing as much situational awareness, which I also very much appreciate. The sound quality on them is just fine. There's very little audio lag. You still get sound locating cues, particularly on the left-right dimension. Not so much the pinna cues, but that's okay. They're reasonably comfortable. They're smallish in the ears. The filtering thing is very nice, and the idea of a bypass to be able to hear what's around you at the tap of a button is great. But let's talk about what's really, really great about these little guys. What's great about these little guys is when you use that sound reduction sort of thing, it can have a real sense of magic. I ride the bus on a regular basis, and the bus is a loud place. In addition to the sound of the bus, you get people talking, you get all kinds of other things, honking, etc. These are able to tune it down in a way that's beautiful. The very first day I wore these, I sit down in my seat, I'm listening to some nice song or another, and I just open up the app, and then I use a swipe down to turn down the outside world. And what this does is it lowers the volume of the outside world relative to what I'm listening to. My music stays the same, but everything else just gets quieter. And that was a really neat experience. And it's compellingly different than every other thing on the market. Because other earbuds absolutely make the outside world a little quieter because you've got something obstructing your ears. But the outside world then becomes a little more muffled. You don't hear some frequencies, etc. Or especially kind of the isolating in-the-ear headphones or in-the-ear monitors completely muffle the outside world. But what this is doing is it's just making it quieter. You hear everything normally. I can still pick up, if I really listen, the conversation of the guy behind me here, but it's just way quieter than my music. I can still hear if the bus is, I don't know, accelerating. I can feel it too, but still, it just gets quieter rather than getting muffled or going away. This is incredibly neat when it's working well, and I loved it. It was like, wow. this is cool. And so to me, that was what was really great here, is the ability to not muffle the outside world, but just to dial it back a little bit as I'm listening to my book on tape, to my music, my part. That is the coolest thing that this can do, and it is cool indeed. But unfortunately, there's some not so cool stuff, so let's talk about what's bad here. So on the bad side, first off, pairing on iOS was pretty ugly. This is Apple's fault rather than their fault, but it's something that Apple has solved using their little W2 or W1 chip, but they don't get to play with that. And so unfortunately, you have to pair the two things individually with Bluetooth Low Energy, and that allows you to control the levels and the filtering and whatnot, which you can use without music. Then you have to pair it separately to use it with music and the phone, etc. Like I said, it's not terrible, but it's not a great process, and it's not something I would do very often. For instance, if I wanted to switch these over to an iPad or something like that. So there you go. Next thing, the little charging case is neat. You just plop these guys into the charging case, and it charges them up. And then see, when I put these guys in there, this little turns on to tell me it's charging up at the moment. Thing is, when you're done charging, this light stays on in green. That seems like a waste of battery to me. To have this light showing green all the time except when it's charged, not super stellar. Not a big fan of that. So, whatever. Next thing, unfortunately, because these are very small and they room for huge antennas, I found that there were often cutouts with them. Not only in the event that I walk farther away from my phone than if it's not in my pocket, but even sometimes if I've got my phone in my back pocket and a backpack on with, a laptop and stuff in there, one of the earbuds or the other would actually cut out on occasion. Not a great thing. Really kind of ugly, actually. So the Bluetooth is not a stellar thing. Next thing, the microphone in these is not all that great for calling, especially when there is any kind of a wind or outdoors and noise kind of thing. There is a reason, for instance, that Apple uses these little extra long pods here that aim more towards your mouth. Omnidirectional microphones are not stellar for picking up the voice, especially when your ears are pointed out in that direction and your mouth is down there. So, yeah, whatever. Not the end of the world, but it's not super great for giving phone calls. Next thing, opening the app on the phone and then going into the settings. For instance, if I want to change the volume of the outside world or something, you have to open the app. And when you open the app for the first time, the music actually cuts out for a little while, and it has to play the little dung-dung tone or whatever the heck it is. That's not a great experience. I hope that they can make that a little more seamless in the future there. Next thing, this case is unfortunately kind of huge. I get it at some level that it needs to be thick, because they need to fit these relatively long earbuds into this case vertically in order to charge them. But this dimension over here is a little bit extra long, and if you compare it to the little tiny thing that the earpods come in, this is really not that much fun to carry. You can throw this, for instance, in your front pocket of your pants, but I felt it. And it's really awkward. I mean, those here one in your pants, or are you just happy to see me and not all that impressive? I don't know, but whatever it is, I didn't love these guys. So I found myself keeping the case in my backpack at the time, and just, I don't know. Case doesn't do anything for me really at all. Then the final thing on the bad side is that the bypass mode needs to be triggered with a tap. But unfortunately, that tap it's not just any tap. It's not like a motion sensitive, just knock the little guy around and it'll be fine. There is one touch sensitive area on this guy that you kind of train yourself to hit. I could do it most of the time, but very often I found myself, if I'm doing that, taking a couple of taps. And so you have the awkward situation. You're supposed to be able to leave these in as you're talking to somebody, for instance. That's a little awkward in and of itself, but if somebody walks up to you and starts talking to you, and you spend, 2 seconds repeatedly whacking your ear trying to turn the damn things off, you don't look all that swinging, I'll say that much. So I really wish that there was either a larger touch-sensitive surface here, or that it was just based on motion, like you just whack it. And I've never had this problem. For instance, the Apple EarPods have the same thing, where if you whack it, it plays or pauses, it turns on Siri, however you got it set up. These guys, unfortunately, it's a much different sort of an affair. So the fact that bypass mode is hard to consistently hit, the fact that it has this surprisingly huge case that you need to carry it in to charge them, the fact that the mic isn't all that that great for calling people that the app cuts out where the sound cuts out when you open the app. There are Bluetooth cutouts for whatever reason, and the pairing on iOS is kind of ugly. All of those things are kind of bad, but let's talk about what's ugly. Okay, so on the ugly side, there are 4 issues. The first one is that the main feature, which is to kind of blend the world and your music seamlessly, has some problems. One of them, for instance, is that it's an additive process rather than a replacement. So let's say you're jamming, you're walking down the street listening to a great song, and a dump truck drives by next to you. What I kind of expected would happen is that the music would get a little bit quieter and the dump truck would get a little bit louder. Sort of there would be a trading relationship between music and the outside world. Or if somebody walks up and starts talking to me, maybe my music would get quieter and their voice would get louder. But instead what happens is I've got my music playing just as loud and somebody talking to me just as loud, which doesn't really solve any particular problem. I understand that this is a processing hellscape. I mean, heck, I'm a digital signal processing guy. This is really hard. But that was a disappointment. What I kind of had hoped would be happening is something like direct sound will quiet and override your music rather than just you'll hear the world and you'll hear your music and everything will be twice as loud. Not as great there. Next thing, speech feels a little weird while using them. Having conversations with people with these in, I felt like, and I'm sure I'd get used to it, but I felt like I had trouble, controlling the volume of my voice because I didn't quite understand exactly how I sounded. So much of speech depends on your proprioception, your ability to hear yourself talk. And so having that slightly delayed and modulated was kind of frustrating to me. The other thing that's completely not on these, but is kind of a problem, is that people walk up to you and they see that you've got earbuds in, and yet you're still talking to them. They're still, and so it's a little bit weird. People look at you like, do you have the earbuds in? Are you going to take those out? And they don't understand that I can hear them just fine. And so on a couple of occasions, I actually said, oh yeah, sorry, I can hear you. They're turned off or something like that. But it's socially not a great thing. And so that whole main feature of blending the world with your music is not quite done right yet, and that causes problems. Next thing. This one is really hard from a signals processing standpoint. I almost feel bad putting it in the ugly, but it is, practically speaking, very ugly. When you have any kind of a source of wideband noise, it just completely wrecks the filter algorithm. What I mean by that is things like a thump, or a whoosh like the wind or something like that. Those are really hard to deal with in a filtering perspective because they go through the entire spectrum. They are loud in every single frequency. And I'm sorry, I'm nerding out here. But regardless, we ignore these noises as humans, but the algorithms just aren't that smart. And so anytime that one of those noises arises, the rest of the world gets quieter because the filter hears like, oh God, it's suddenly really loud. Let me turn that down a little bit. But the rest of the world goes down with it. And so as a result, if you're walking, because there's always a little bit of a thumping to it, the world is suddenly getting louder and quieter. And you can kind of hear, for instance, if there's wind rustling in the trees, your walking sounds like maybe I'm a loud walker or something like that. I don't freaking know. But whatever it was really disconcerting, and it kind of made that whole listening to the outside world through these a little bit weird. But the bigger issue here is that wind plays heck with these guys. If there is any wind at all blowing past these, it will pick that up, just in the same way that, wind plays problems with any microphone. You get the artifacts and things like that. And that's really, really bad because the rest of the world gets very quiet and you're listening to music and hearing at a very loud volume on top of it. Really, really ugly. And so as a result, most of the time while I was walking around outside, I had the blend turned way down so that the outside world was almost inaudible. And that made the wind noise okay. That made the lack of sound completely go away. But at that point, you've lost all your situational awareness anyways, and you might as well be wearing really isolating in-ear monitors. The only difference is you can't tap those on the outside to pull them out, or to turn them off. You have to pull them out instead. So those wideband noises just cause trouble for this and make these way less compelling than they otherwise could be. Next issue, and probably the biggest issue here, is the battery life. These little guys, out of your ear, or I'm sorry, when they're in your ears, you get someplace between 1 and 2 hours of use. I'm going to say that kind of vaguely because honestly, I never got greater than an hour 45 or so on them. Practically speaking, it was usually someplace between an hour out of hour 45. They claim 2, maybe you could get 2 if you weren't using them for music at all, but still. That's not a great amount of battery life. And then the thing is, if you want to charge them back up, you need to put them in the case for 2 hours, and then you're good to go for another 2 hours. This is simply just not enough. I mean, it'll get me to work. That'll cover my commute. But there is no way that that's acceptable battery life for these guys, especially when it takes an hour and a half, 2 hours to charge them back up again. And unlike a lot of solutions, for instance, your around the neck sorts of Bluetooth things, you can plug those guys in and use them while you charge them while you're using them. But these guys, unfortunately, you literally cannot charge them while they're in your ears. So that's really ugly. You get a maximum of like an hour and a half, 2 hours in these guys. No freaking good. And then finally, on the ugly side, I've spent a lot of time here, and that pains me because these are really cool, but the price on these guys is really high. $299 for this little setup here. I get why this is expensive. I absolutely do. I mean, this is very high-end signal processing gear in a very tiny package. Think about hearing aids and how expensive they are, but these have more complications still. So I'm not saying that they are ripping us off, that they are charging us way more than these cost, so that these are already kind of a problem. But I have to review these in terms of what is out there. I have to review them in terms of the competition. And the thing is, these are way, way up there relative to your other options here. This is more expensive than similar solutions to this from other people. For instance, these are twice the price of Apple's EarPods, which are already really freaking expensive. You can get great in-ear monitors for that kind of price, and those will isolate you from the world as well. I mean, none of those solutions have as good a degree of control, but the thing is, a little less control than $150 in my pocket is kind of compelling. So these would really have to be perfect to be okay at that price point, and unfortunately, they just don't hit the mark. And so the price on these is really, really high. They don't quite have the level of perfection to make that palatable to me. So that's what's ugly to me, is that these are $299. The battery life is just not enough for many, many situations. We'll come back to that later. The wideband noise absolutely is problematic for the signal processing, and the main feature of blending the world with your music is a little bit problematic from the get-go, at least in this implementation. So let's talk about the final conclusions here. Final conclusion, first off, I gotta say, I respect the heck out of this. I'm a signal processing guy, and I understand the amount of pain that's associated with doing what they're looking for here. This may seem like something relatively straightforward to the rest of the world, but in reality, this is a moonshot. To even attempt to do this, to attempt to solve these problems is kind of insane. And it makes it very easy if you don't understand everything that's going on behind the scenes here, and I don't even claim to think about how much they got wrong here. But in reality, what's most impressive is how much they got right. I'm sure they hired a bunch of hearing aid engineers, and that makes life a little bit easier for them, but this is super hard stuff to do. This is an incredible little system, even as it stands right now, and they should absolutely be commended for doing it. And I'm sure that future updates are going to improve this product a fair amount. I mean, filters, behaviors, etc., all that can be tweaked, and it will get better. But the thing is, even with my deep sympathy and my great respect for what they've done, I still can't say I recommend them, because the wind noise issue is a big deal, as is step noise, as is the price tag. But the biggest issue, I mean, all of those things are livable, but the biggest issue is absolutely the battery life. They are at their most wonderful when you leave them in, when you just put them in your ear, they live there, they give you the sound you want, they take rid of the sound you don't want. But the thing is, that the product is saying leave it in, but the battery life is saying, oh God, no, take them out, charge them. Because you have to constantly be thinking about battery life. And the places where these would be best are areas of just long-term noise, like on a plane ride, or a train ride, or a road trip, or a long city walk, or even if you work in an office, you could leave these guys in all day long, tone down the outside world, and if someone comes up, starts talking to you, give them a little tap, and then next thing you know, you're talking happily. That would be the ideal case for these, but in all of those cases, this just doesn't have the staying power. You get 2 hours, then 2 hours in the charger, then 2 hours in the charger, 2 hours in the charger, then you have to charge this guy a little back up here, and it's a whole thing. And so, unfortunately, this just doesn't have the battery life to do what it needs to do to be super cool. And so, I think that this is a great idea, but the form factor here, doing the individual in the earbuds, feels to me like wishful thinking. I agree that this will absolutely be the approach. I mean, it's a super common thing in science fiction. You know, Ender's Game has the jewel. You just put it in your ear and suddenly, well, the whole Ender's series, that is. And then you can hear whatever's in the world as well as, you know, an AI or whatever the heck else. I mean, this will absolutely be the future of earbuds. Something like this, but ideally smaller and more awesome. And you'll have a tiny device in your ear, and even for high-end hearing aid wearers, this is already kind of a reality, although with a lot of disposable batteries and an external unit. The thing is, we are just not there yet in terms of battery technology. It's not there. Using individual earbuds in 2017, whether you're these folks or otherwise, makes you have a bunch of sacrifices. Things like Bluetooth issues or an awkward case that you have to carry around to charge, or just really crappy battery life. And so I kind of feel like by going to this individual bud form factor, they've kind of screwed themselves over a little bit. I think this would be way more compelling with a small neck unit, sort of the C-ring shaped Bluetooth things, and then little wires that go up to buds in the ears. The reason I say that is that, A, it's a little bit more socially acceptable in 2017. People aren't quite ready for having these where your ears are, but they would become sort of an all-day accessory. You'd have better computing power for processing, the possibility of another non-ear mic for noise cancellation or wind cancellation, ideally. You'd have no awkward box to carry around, and in a form factor like that, you could put a big battery in there and have enough battery for a flight or a train ride or something like that. And this would help to address the biggest issue as well as bring some of the most compelling uses for this little guy into reach. And so my final conclusion, as I've been saying here, is that they are a great start and they are already a huge part of the way to the finish line. I did not expect to be as impressed with these guys as I am. But the thing is, right now, there are just too many functional issues with them for me to be head over heels in love. And the price is just too high to accept these kinds of functional issues, especially when the competition, things like Apple's AirPods and any other things out there in the Bluetooth world, are just so damn good. So Doppler Labs, the company making these, is a company to watch. They are making great strides, and although they are not there yet remotely, they're also not that far out, and I will absolutely check out every one of their future products. I think that in a couple of more years, whether due to improvements in batteries and their tech or just a more realistic form factor, they're going to have something incredible on their hands. But for now, unfortunately, I can't recommend it, and, well, I'm out of here. Get it? But anyways, I hope this is interesting, that you heard what I'm saying, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful and relatively less noisy rest of your day. Bye now.